Welcome, everybody, to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting-edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And guys, we are so going to do it again tonight with one of our favorite people in the universe. And Augie's going to tell you about him. But I would like to thank you for being here. As always, we're always so grateful to have you. Love the lively chat that goes on in the chat room. Yep, and I still have my volume up. If you have any questions for Paul, please put them in capital letters so I can discern them from the regular chat. And I would like to invite you to our membership group, our YouTube membership group. That's kind of a behind the scenes kind of venue where you guys get up close and personal with Augie and I. We have Zoom gatherings. We have special guests that come to the Zooms for the members. We had the amazing Jenny G who came and gave readings, and we're going to have other a naturopathic doctor and all kinds of things that will personally benefit you and that you can interact one-on-one with these people and ourselves. And Augie and I are test driving some of our personal, more vulnerable information back in the membership group. Augie put up his video that I highly recommend you check out. It's an hour that goes by like that. And I'm doing a talk series on breaking the cycle of abuse and healing from domestic violence and narcissistic abuse. So that's from my personal experience. So my intention is that if one person can find freedom or healing from that, then my mission has been accomplished. So the other thing I want to invite you to, finally, I have the best example of what happens at the Mastermind Connection. The Mastermind Connection is a group meeting that happens on Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. Eastern. We get together and we intend, we take intentions from everybody that's gathered, and we visualize the intention, put it up into the quantum realm with a beautiful meditative guided imagery, and then we see what happens. One of our members brought to us that their household dog, who was only 2 years old, had been out 9 hours in the snow in Canada and really wanted the dog to come home. So together, during our visualization, we imagined all of our light coming together with the quantum light, with divine light, going out, reaching the dog, and the dog finding its way home. Now, with all good intentions, we don't tell the universe how to do it, right? Well, you're going to find the dog here. We want him to come home here, right? We just put that intention out that way, and amazing, the dog was home before the session was over, before the hour-long session was over. So that is one of the best examples I can give you of what happens at the Mastermind Connection. And we do it for other kinds of benevolent reasons. So if that sounds good to you and you want to come join us, send an email to the Mastermind Connection at gmail.com. Augie will send you the link. Come on in, hang out with us. We have a chat the second hour, and it's always amazing. So, Augie, please tell us about our beloved guest. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. This is going to be fun. I've been looking forward to this since we talked last time when we booked the hour. I have great admiration for our guest, because we have Paul Anthony Wallis with us again. He is returning to Broadcast Team Alpha, and he has written several books, and he's a phenomenal sought-after guest. He's a world traveler and a researcher and a digger into the old records hardly that anybody ever know anything about. And he is an international best-selling author, and his books, they probe ancient human history and mythologies that shows up to be true, many of them. And he is, like I said, sought-after speaker and make video documentaries, and these are seen by the millions. And he is in Australia, and he is one of my favorite time travelers, because if he looks at his watch right now, it is in the early afternoon tomorrow. All right. And gosh, I've been talking way too much. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Augie. Hi, Noory. It's great to be back with you.
Oh, it's always so good to have you here. So good to have you here. So very exciting. Very exciting. You've got your 4th book coming out.
4th of my series in Paleo-contact. That's right. So 4th in the Eden series.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. So before you start, I have to warn you. Sunday during the Mastermind Connection, I was talking about you, and I mentioned that you sometimes do some counseling / coaching, mentoring. So if you get a flood of that in your inbox, I hope that's good. Oh, okay. So Paul has just recently had a move interstate in Australia, and the internet. Oh, he's back now. So there may be moments of times of Paul freezing, and he's back now. Yay.
That's it. Well, yes, you're absolutely right. I'm really enjoying my coaching at the moment because I'm meeting such an incredible diversity of people from all around the world, many of whom are enriching me not only with their personal experiences that we're processing together, but because they are from cultures that carry indigenous story that I listen to, and I think I can recognize the patterns in this story from this culture in comparison with a totally different country, a totally different era. A similar story is coming. And some of the research that led to Echoes of Eden in particular, which focused on initiation traditions, came from relationships that I had established in personal coaching. So I'm very welcoming of everyone who seeks me out that way. But what's led to the next in the Eden series is people probably know that the first 3, Escaping from Eden, The Scars of Eden, Echoes of Eden, really flowed from my work in Bible translation. My background is in Christian ministry. I trained pastors in hermeneutics, the principles of interpretation of ancient texts, and in the history of Christian thought. And it was the disciplines of those subject areas that led me to another layer of story in the Bible. When I applied all the tools that we learn in theological college to the anomalies in the text, the stories that don't make sense, or the texts that seem to teach a different story to the one we're all familiar with, what emerged was through the root meanings of key words, I could see the vestiges of the original layer, an earlier layer. Now, people know there's a very wide consensus at an academic level that many of the stories we have in the Bible are redactions of earlier versions, and that the sources of those earlier versions are in the cultures that were spawned from ancient Sumeria. So Sumeria, Babylonia, Arcadia, Assyria. And that's what led me into this world of Paleo-contact, realizing that the Bible, from cover to cover, is full of stories of ancient ET contact, and that some of those stories have been mistranslated as stories of God. And I say that not out of any intention to debunk God or debunk Jesus, but simply to say there's another layer of story in there that's even older and that puts us in a populated universe. So the first 3 books that have unpacked the implications of that information. But in the new book coming out in May, The Eden Conspiracy, I'm asking a still deeper question, which is, if those texts were not all God texts in the beginning, yes, they have paleo-contact in them, but why were they written?
Yes.
What was the purpose of the writers in telling these stories, and why were they curated with such care from generation to generation? What were they wanting to teach us? Was it just that we're in a populated cosmos? Or are there other layers of teaching that we've missed through this process of translating out of Paleo-contact? So I go back to the Bible and ask, what was the Bible before it became a book about God? And to echo what you were saying earlier, Age, what were our ancestral narratives before they became regarded as fiction? What did our ancestors want to know? And in the Eden Conspiracy, the conclusions I reach is that there are profound lessons about human potential, social progress, and emotional intelligence that our ancestors thought were very important for us to know in order for us to navigate the world in which we live. And so there's this whole layer of forgotten wisdom that the Eden Conspiracy seeks to resurface.
I love that. And I didn't get to say it before because Mac was like, okay, we're on. I'm so curious. So what was the Bible before God? I mean, that's a huge question.
Yes, well, I talk a little bit in the Eden Conspiracy about how the Bible was formed. And prior to the 6th century BCE, it was a kaleidoscope of texts about all kinds of things. And so you had the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, which itself was a library of earlier texts which had been edited together to become books of law, but they actually contained memories of Paleo-contact, memories of previous civilizations. And then there were other texts besides coming more recently into Jewish history, where you've got stories that are about covert government, stories of Paleo-contact, some of which is violent colonization, and stories of Paleo-contact, some of which is the visitors who came and tutored our ancestors and taught us how to live in balance with the planet and how to become a civilization. There was a huge spectrum of experiences being described in these early books. So you do have books of history, you do have books of law, but a lot of the stories were commemorations of contact. And when you get into the writings of the prophets, you come to a writer like Jeremiah, and you realize that what he is lamenting is the fact that Judaism is not what he thinks it should be. He thinks Judaism should be a very simple monotheistic religion, and laments the fact that he can go to every high hill and under every green tree and find installations there to commemorate Paleo-contact. And he wants all that stopped. And in the 7th century BCE, a new king came along called Josiah, who wanted all that stopped. He regarded all that as a huge distraction from Jewish monotheism. And so the Jerusalem Guard was sent out to knock down the standing stones that mark the places of VT contact, to break the altars that were places of thanksgiving to the entities who had tutored their ancestors, to break the heads of the figurines commemorating Asherah and other ancient visitors who were advanced beings who helped humanity in the deep past. What that tells us is that in the 7th century BCE, Judaism was full of Paleo-contact and celebrated it, celebrated a whole array of ancient visitors. And Josiah said, enough of that. We're getting rid of that, and we're paring Judaism down to a religion where there's only one temple, and that's the one in Jerusalem. Where there's only one king, that's the king in Jerusalem. Where the tithes all come to Jerusalem. They don't go to local centers. And so there was this huge centralization of money, power, political power, and the control of the narrative, what Jews believe. All that was done under King Josiah in the name of cleaning up Jewish ritual. And then in the 6th century BCE, the same process was applied to the scriptures to edit those in such a way that the memory of Asherah and Dagon and other entities gets airbrushed over or reframed as something very negative. called idolatry, so that the attention of the Jewish people will be solely on their God, Yahweh, a name that had come to represent the God of the cosmos, but which in the beginning simply referred to one of many powerful entities they had interacted with in the past.
Yeah, who was this guy Yahweh? In my research, I found he was married and had several children. Who was this guy?
Well, Yahweh is the holy name for God in today's Judaism. But when you analyze the history of the Bible, you realize that that name has been superimposed over other stories. So there are far older stories of the Elohim, the powerful ones. And the name Yahweh has been pasted over some of those older stories in the later edit. So what I present in my books is that Yahweh was one of a number of powerful ones. And in the Eden Conspiracy, I point out that he wasn't even the senior of the powerful ones. He was one of a number who had human colonies, geographical areas parceled out to them. And then those powerful ones lived in sort of uneasy rivalry and competition with one another. Yahweh was one of those. I also look at the history of the name of Yahweh because there's a great mystery around what the word means. And I argue that the Tetragrammaton is in fact a loan word. It's not a Hebrew word. It's a loan word from another language. And just to illustrate what a loan word is, in the late 1950s, I believe it was, linguists in Italy started coming across unfamiliar words. One was sciavolo and another was Siriola. And they found it written down. Siriola was Siriola and sciavolo was Schiavelo. They couldn't find any etymology for those words in the Italian language. There was nothing, no history to those words. They seemed to appear from nowhere. Sciavolo was a digging item, but the Italian language has a word for the digging item. It's la pala. And then they worked out the usage, and bit by bit, the penny dropped. Siriola is city hall. It's an American couple of words, city hall, but written in the sound system of Italian, it becomes Siriola, Siriola. And so they're just written down words that they had picked up while living in America and then brought back to Italy and to Sicily. And sciavolo, well, that's a shovel. Again, it's an American word or an English word, which they'd simply spelt in the Italian sound system. I argue that Yahweh is a word like that. No history to it in Proto-Semitic. It's a loan word. It's come from somewhere else. What happens in the Yahweh stories gives another clue. The shape of the Yahweh story fits precisely in the shape of the world's dragon narratives. And those dragon narratives are really stories of social progress, the story where humanity moves from a place of slavery to a place of freedom, from a place of despotic leadership to a place where we discover each other, learn to organize, learn to act in solidarity, and build society for ourselves from the grassroots. That's the rough shape of the dragon stories, and the Yahweh stories fit precisely into that scheme. Now, it's a bit shocking to many if I say Yahweh dragon stories in the same sentence, but if I tell you the names of some of the ancient dragons from around the world, you might notice something. Coca in Portugal and Spain, Kur in Greece, Quetzalcoatl, Cucumats, Kukulkan in Mesoamerica, Kuchedra, Ikuchu in Japan, Polkis in Georgia, Akek in Egypt. Every one of those names you've got in the name, or in the name. And so I argue in Echoes of Eden, and I refer to it again in the Eden Conspiracy, that those names are the evocation of a sound that our ancestors have remembered, a sound they associated with the ancient dragons.
Wow.
I wonder, I mean, I was brought up on Doctor Who, and you always knew the monster was in the dark recesses of the hallway because you would hear its raspy breath as it came down the hallway. And I wonder if the sound of these entities is recalled by the names.
Wow.
Now we go to Asherah. There is a smoking gun verse in Joshua 24 where Joshua says to the people, don't serve the powerful ones your ancestors served in Mesopotamia, Abraham and Sarah and your ancestors. Don't serve the Asherah of Egypt, serve Yahweh, our powerful one. And let's pause, sorry, don't serve Asherah, serve Yahweh. Those names are almost identical, and he is equivalencing the service. You either serve one powerful entity or this powerful entity. One's called Asherah and one's called Yahweh. And I'm not mispronouncing the name. What I'm doing is using the sound system, a Proto-Northwest Semitic, the ancestor of Hebrew, and I'm voicing the H's in the Tetragrammaton. And suddenly we realize that Yahweh fits within this canon of names. Yahweh, Asher, Cholchis, and on it goes. Chocha. It's the same kind of entity, the same kind of name. So that really drew my attention back to the Yahweh stories and realizing that there's a pivot in the story where we start off with people being governed directly, the tribes of Israel, governed directly by Yahweh. And then just like in all the other dragon stories, they reach a point where they say, no, we don't want to work for you anymore. We don't want direct rule by Yahweh. We don't want unaccountable power. We don't want our lives to be all about providing you with beef and lamb, virgin girls and gold, because that's what all dragons want, and it's what Yahweh wanted from his people. We are going to be governed by one of our own henceforward. Now that happens in 1 Samuel 8. If Yahweh is supposed to be Almighty God in that story, it becomes a nonsense. Why on earth would the tribes of Israel say, we don't want direct governance by Almighty God, we want a human king instead? If what you want is advantage on the battlefield or advantage in diplomacy, you're not going to get better advantage from a human being than from Almighty God. So it's a clue that in that moment, Yahweh is referring to a kind of non-human leadership that the people don't want. And in an instant that you switch the translation, you realize this is the same as all the other dragon stories.
Wow.
Except that there is a PS. Because even though the people fire Yahweh and say, we don't want your leadership anymore, he appoints his own successor, Saul. And when his successor isn't violent enough in war, Yahweh gets rid of him and finds a man after my own heart, David, someone who is renowned, of course, for being willing to use murder simply for his own pleasure to clear the pathway to a happy royal marriage. A man after my own heart, says Yahweh. But then when David begins to question Yahweh's orders around warfare, David only wants to win winnable wars, so he counts his troops, and Yahweh brings about consequences. Punitive action is taken, and 70,000 of David's own fighting men are killed as a punishment for David questioning orders. And so now we realize the story has gone beyond the usual dragon story, and it's giving us a lesson about covert government that says just because you've replaced a king with a president or a king with a prime minister, or there's been a regime change, doesn't mean that the power behind the throne has changed. Doesn't mean that the hidden hands defining public policy are any different to what they were before. And to express that in modern terms, It happens in Australia for sure. I know it happens in Great Britain. It probably happens in the USA as well, where major corporations make significant financial donations to both sides in a general election, both major parties, so that whoever wins the election, there will be kickbacks, and the same hidden hand continues to shape public policy. Now, those lessons are all there in the Bible when you translate Yahweh as a powerful one, translate him as God, and all that wisdom.
Wow. So
Oh,
we're
boy.
going to wait a second for Paul to come back, which is good because I don't know about you guys, but I need to wrap my head around this. This is some powerful conversation. My goodness.
Yeah, this is
Yes, Paul.
serious. And hey, Paul is back. Boy,
So-
now it just got good, and then you froze.
So that's the level of information we're really being given quite an education in the realpolitik of a planet Earth. First of all, that story is telling us there is a non-human layer to human governance. And our ancestors are saying, you will never understand fully why certain things happen on planet Earth until you realize there's that non-human layer. And then it's teaching us about covert government and to look out for that. And to lose all that wisdom through this redaction that turns into a story about God is a terrible loss. And the Eden conspiracy seeks to shine a light on this earlier layer of information, which is oh so relevant to the 21st century.
Oh, that's going to be a book that is a must read, because this is something that everybody alive is wondering about. And I'm getting the impression from the way you express it that Yahweh in his dealings on earth was a physical being, not a spiritual God.
Well, that's right. As I said earlier, the name Yahweh is used in different ways throughout the scriptures. And by the time you get to the minor prophets, they're using the name to indicate a beautiful cosmic vision of God. They will use the name Yahweh, and they're talking about the source of the cosmos and everything in it. But you go to earlier stories, and Yahweh is denoting a physical entity, a non-human colonizer among many in the deep past. And the Bible speaks about the Tseva Hasaim, the sky armies, all those who came from the sky, from the stars, in their advanced technology, and colonized us in the deep past. And there's a great spectrum of experiences. And Yahweh is at the violent end of that spectrum. Another name he takes on himself as El Shaddai is the Destroyer. His name can be translated God of the Plains, God of the Mountains, or the Powerful One, the Destroyer. And then he does various things to prove that he's worthy of that name. And there are quite a few stories in the Bible that run along those lines. So that's the violent end of colonization. And the way he colonizes is so similar to the way Britain colonized in the past and empires of the world. All the means of control and terror. And he spells them out in 1 Samuel 8. You read 1 Samuel 8 and you'll think you're reading about the British in Kenya under Queen Elizabeth II. But no, Yahweh did exactly the same. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got...
Oh, boy.
It's okay. He'll be back in a second.
Yeah, we're back.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
This is so unbelievable.
This is research that I have
Under
not
every high
heard
tree.
before. Yeah.
There would be commemorative actions towards Asherah. And she was remembered for having arrived, and I'll say from where a little later, and tutored our ancestors in agronomy, all the secrets of agriculture that allowed us to become a city-building civilization. That was the memory that had to be stamped out. And there are moments in, I think it's in 2 Kings, where the writer tells us very plainly that the Jewish memory at that time was Yahweh bad, Asherah good. It says they disparaged Yahweh, they spoke slightingly of him, and they rejected his laws, but they remembered Asherah with affection. Now, the writer of 2 Kings tells us that, but in such a way that the reader's reaction is supposed to be, oh, how shocking. But the moment you separate the writer's opinion of what's happening from his report of what's happening, and you realize he's just told us that Judaism at that time was very different to what we think it was, and it was one that honored our ancient visitors. And in that respect, it makes the Bible an incredibly valuable resource, giving us a window into the worldview and cosmology and memory of our ancestors.
Wow.
And then there's so many books taken out of the original draft that was created in Nicaea 325, 26, and part of 327, when the 223 people got together to create the first draft. But a lot of that stuff they created was taken out later on, so it was kind of hidden from the masses.
Yes, it was. And that was really part of the process where Christianity was hijacked by the Roman Empire. In the beginning, Christianity was a kaleidoscope of theologies and experiences and memories. So, I mean, around the crucifixion of Jesus, there were a kaleidoscope of stories and a kaleidoscope of opinions. What happened there, what happened afterwards. But by the time you get to 325, 354, the kaleidoscope has disappeared. There's only one story now that's acceptable. And there is such a threat on the other memories that a number of those other texts were literally buried in the desert to prevent them from being destroyed forever. Because once the empire got its hands on Christianity, you get to 381, and Theodosius, the emperor, effectively militarizes that orthodoxy. If you don't hold to that orthodoxy, you're now an enemy of the state. You know, you're now someone whose books are not going to appear in any person, a respectable person's library. And so the threat was clearly on. That's the history of the Nag Hammadi scrolls, buried in the desert by esoteric communities to protect that information for later generations, such as us, when we discovered them just after the Second World War. And now we discover, the Christian experience in the beginning was far more diverse. And so we've got conversation about other kinds of entity, cosmic company. We've got other explanations of what happened around the cross that marries with indigenous story from all around the world. And we begin to see the Orthodox story in a different perspective.
I love this. So can we... And if I'm kind of taking us back too far or derailing the train of thought here, Asherah, who is Asherah? Okay, so Paul's frozen just for a second. So guys, are you loving this in the chat room? Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for the super chat. So appreciated. Paul's going to be right back with us.
I am right back. So I missed your question, Noory. I'm sorry.
My question was, and let me know if I'm taking us too far back, but for those of us who don't really know, who was Asherah?
Well, Asherah is a fascinating figure. As I say, she was clearly very central to Jewish worship. We find her in carvings throughout Judea, throughout the Levant, and further afield. She is a powerful female figure. And when I say powerful, many people will know the ancient carving of Gilgamesh, which shows him a very tall, powerful, bearded figure, and he's holding a lion under one arm. And the size of the lion, I mean, it looks like a lap cat in comparison with him. So that shows you the size and power of Gilgamesh, the crossover king between the ET kings and the human kings, according to Sumerian story. Well, we found carvings of Asherah where she's holding two lions on a similar scale by the ears.
Wow.
So she's a very powerful figure, very feminine as well. She's often portrayed bare-breasted and with big bouffant hair. but she's always associated with agriculture and fertility. She is the one who came and sat with our ancestors and taught us which plants are good for food, which are good for medicines, which are good to avoid, which berry you should eat if you don't want to have a baby, which berry you should eat if you want to have a baby. So she's associated with all that story of the nurture of humanity, stories that we hear from cultures all around the world. And what's very intriguing is we have a little insight on where she came from. And that clue comes at a site in Samaria. It's Tel Al-Farad. And from the 1940s on, it was excavated by a Frenchman, Roland de Vaux. And one of the most incredible things he found was a naos. Now, a naos is a really interesting thing. It is a doorway in which you will usually see a powerful being. And in this case, you see Asherah standing in the doorway. But the doorway has no building. There's nothing behind it. There's nothing at the sides. So if you ask an archaeologist, what does that mean? They'll say, well, a naos represents a temple. So it doesn't show the building, but the building is implied. And so this represents a temple to Asherah. That's great. And that may be absolutely correct. But I think if I say to you, a doorway that appears to go to nothing, and there's nothing behind it, but someone comes through it, we call that a portal, don't we?
That's what I was just thinking. That's what I was thinking.
There's other symbology on that naos that would suggest what was on the other side, where Asherah had come from to come through that portal, because we have a crescent moon and a group of stars. Now, the crescent moon, what does that mean? I'm going to suggest that this is an appeal to earlier symbology. If we ask the question, what does that mean in Sumerian symbology? It means a star map. Now, symbology can have many, many layers, and I learnt this when I was an assistant minister in London. I wore vestments and we did rituals that all had a Christian meaning. But if an ancient Jew had visited, they'd have seen our reserved sacrament and they would say, oh, that's the ritual of the showbread. They would see all the clothes I'm wearing and they'd say, oh, that's the high priesthood of the Jerusalem temple. Somebody from Babylon would see the purple that our bishop would arrive in and say, oh, that's the royal color of King Cyrus of Persia. So we might have one layer of interpretation of our symbology. Someone else comes along and says there's an earlier meaning, and I'll tell you what that is. So here's the earlier meaning of the crescent moon and that group of stars. The crescent moon means Taurus, the bull constellation. And that group of stars is a particular corner of the bull constellation. It's the shoulder of the bull. It's the stars of the Pleiades. And so here we have a naos in Tel Al-Farad near some standing stones. Standing stones means somebody turned up there. This tells us it was Asherah who showed up and that she'd come from the bull constellation and specifically a planet orbiting one of the stars in the Pleiades. Now, the reason I'm so confident that is the right reading of that symbology is that you can go to cultures all around the world, ask the question, where did our ancient tutors in agronomy come from? The Cherokee will tell you the Pleiades. Aboriginal Australians would tell you the Pleiades. The Jews of Tel Al-Farad would have told you the same. Asherah came from the Pleiades. And so we realize that the biblical memory is part of a world canon of memory about the history of the human race and the history of human progress. And again, all that disappears if you just listen to the value judgments of the biblical narrator saying, oh, they all worshipped Asherah. Wasn't that awful? We need to pause and say, why? Why did they? Who was she? And this whole other story emerges.
Wow. Ooh, Paul.
Man.
We're moving a lot of energy here. My goodness. Wow.
So I love the fact that it's just very interesting, isn't it? That when that cleanup happened of the scriptures, the whole female side of the Paleo-contact story vanishes. And you're just left with the male side, which is all about control, an ordered society, law-giving, law-keeping. And all this nurture and grassroots energy disappears.
Amazing.
Isn't it fun to think that in many of the villages and the societies in Africa, it is a female that is the head of the clan, so to speak, and those are the peaceful ones.
That's very true. I mean, if you listen to the Zulu people, they have a memory of a figure very similar, and that's Mbabwana Warisa, who taught them farming, taught them how to live in balance with their land. And if you spend time with original Australians and talk about the experience of initiation, you'll discover that all the learning that happens to do with farming, living in balance with the land, health, all that happens prior to the male's initiation into the male jobs. All that information comes from the women. And I think that idea that this is the women's contribution to culture build in that way, to provide all the glue for society, to provide all the bedrock for society, I think can be traced back to these largely female entities who are remembered for this tuition in the beginning. And I think that their role was inherited from figures like Mbabwana Warisa and Asherah.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, because this gets lost as well, that's women teaching men. Mm-hmm. Something which has been a taboo in many ancient cultures, but you go prior to the ancient cultures to even more ancient, and you realize, no, that's the primordial education.
Right. They actually completely flipped it. Wow.
They flipped it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I'm not going to ask this question. I was going to go back to the tetragrammatron, so I don't want to do that because we're on a really good track. So,
well,
there are other. Go ahead, Augie.
I got a quick thought. We were talking about this lady, and what about Joshua? Maybe we could go forward a little bit. There is a great controversy about his emergence into the world. Where did he come from? What do you think?
It's a great question. In the Scars of Eden, I point out the appearance of Yeshua runs in parallel with a number of other stories. Christianity has liked to tell the story of Jesus or Yeshua as a unique story, a unique birth narrative, a unique conception. However, you've only got to read his cousin's story in the same book, in the Gospels, to realize actually John the Baptist's birth narrative is very similar to Jesus's. And then when you read the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, you realize that there are parallels between those stories and the birth narrative of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah. What they all have in common is mothers who are not naturally going to have a baby. So Sarah is post-menopause, she's not going to have a baby. And then she has a close encounter with non-human entities and gives birth to a very significant human being. Really the beginning of the story of history as we know it in the Bible. Same with John the Baptist. His mum, post-menopause, has a close encounter with a non-human entity, becomes pregnant with a very significant human being. So significant that Jesus described John the Baptist as the greatest human being who had ever lived. And I think we forget the huge cult that operated around John the Baptist, the awe in which he was held, why his endorsement of Jesus was so significant. And then we get to Jesus, and again, here's the girl not going to have a baby because she's a virgin. She's never had sex, and yet she has a close encounter with a non-human entity. Now she's going to have a very significant baby called Jesus. These stories have parallels beyond the Bible, beyond the Judeo-Christian tradition. Listen to the legends of Lao Tzu, and his mother has the same experience. Listen.
Yeah, and I found 16 other religions with the same stories in them.
You did?
Yeah.
He'll be back in 1 second.
Virgin birth. Yeah, he'll be back in a second.
Paul's back now.
Okay, I'm back. So if you listen to the story of the Yellow Emperor, his mother has an anomalous experience with a phenomenon in the sky, in the stars. A beam of light shines upon her, and now she's pregnant with the Yellow Emperor. Same with Lao Tzu. And then intriguingly, you go to a Renaissance painting of the conception of Jesus within the womb of Mary, painting, I always get this date wrong, I think it's 1486 by Carlo Crivelli. And the story is not told in the same way that it's reported in the canonical Gospels. He paints a beam of light coming from an anomaly in the sky into something Mary's wearing on her head, and now she's pregnant with Jesus. So you can begin joining these stories together and realizing that this is part of a world canon of narratives of what we could either call supernatural births, or we recognize that we've got contemporary language for it called artificial insemination.
Yes.
They're all stories of non-natural insemination and very significant babies resulting. Now, someone might hear that story and say, oh, come on. These stories are just made up to explain why these people were so special. Jesus was amazing. There must have been something unusual about his conception. Lao Tzu was amazing. There must have been something amazing about his conception. Leonardo da Vinci, Pythagoras, so on and so forth. And so they've created a story to explain why he was a genius. Well, you know, that's a fair comment, except that if you are willing to listen, there are, I wouldn't like to put a number on it, but women all around the world today who will tell you there is something different about their third child. That's the sensitive one. That's the one who talks about a previous life. That's the genius. That's the one who has precognitive experiences. And yes, of my 4 children, that's the one where there was something very unusual about his conception, and it was a phenomenon of light. Now, I don't know if you've heard stories like that, because women who experience that today hold those stories very close. They don't share those stories because it sounds ridiculous, because we have forgotten the pedigree of this experience, that it is all around the planet and that it is ages old. And so, yes, your third child is the special one. Yes, Jesus was the special one. And I think we really do ourselves a disservice as Christian believers when we tell Jesus' story as a totally unique story, instead of saying this is part of a big picture that is very significant and is telling us something about our place in the cosmos, the fact that we are loved as a species, the fact that we have help as a species, the fact that the universe is providing us as a planet and as a civilization with support. And the arrival of Jesus, Lao Tzu, the Yellow Emperor, Leonardo da Vinci, Pythagoras, is all part of the support that we're being offered. There are so many powerful and positive therefores that flow from recognizing this bigger context. And so in the Scars of Eden, I tell that story. In the Echoes of Eden, I unpack some of the implications of it. And I think it's important that we recover this knowledge, because our ancestors went to such lengths to bequeath these stories to us.
Yes. Wow. This is a modern day question, I think. Does the Vatican know all this? Do they know this?
Does the Vatican know all this?
Yeah.
I think
so. If I know it, then the Vatican knows it. I remember visiting the Vatican years ago. My parents took me on a holiday to Italy, and so we made a trip into Vatican City. We walked around the corridors, shown some of the loot that had been plundered from other people's countries, and the guide politely said, "The popes have always been great curators of the arts," which is a sweet way of saying they found valuable stuff all around the world and they brought it here. And that certainly applies to the Vatican Library. And so if you think about all the wisdom, for instance, of the Mayan civilization, now that was a literate, written culture. When the Mayan countries were taken, it involved burning down vast libraries of wisdom, knowledge, information, technology. And that included information about Paleo-contact. It included information about human origins, ancient technology. We know that because of some of the texts that survived and that were later translated into Spanish, for instance, by Francisco Jimenez, who was parish priest in Chichicastenango in Guatemala. So we now know what was in the texts that were burned, but I would reckon that choice texts were taken back for the kings of Portugal and Spain and back for the Pope for his library in the Vatican, so that they would know what this information was and nobody else would know. They executed all the priests so that if any of the copies survived in Central and South America, there'd be no one left who knew how to read them. But there are clues now that that's exactly what happened. Most copies were burned. The others were taken to the Vatican, to Spain, to Portugal. And the clues are that the information that was in those texts can now be found in other sources around the world, which we can trace back to the text, because now we have the Pope Ovu and we know what was in it. And we can see, oh, goodness, John Dee knew this and was supplying this information to Queen Elizabeth I. I talk about this in Echoes of Eden. And so this is what happens through colonization. The old knowledge doesn't disappear. It goes to two places. It goes to the grassroots to be carried by the survivors of the ancient priesthoods, and it's told orally from one generation to the next. And then it goes to the elites, the people who do have the key to the Vatican Library or the King of Spain's library. So this is a long answer to your question, Noory, that says, yes, of course, the Vatican knows all this. And maybe at opportune moments, they might leak a bit of information from time to time. But of course, it is all about controlling the narrative. I mean, once again, just like Josiah wanting to monotheize Judaism, they want to keep Christianity neat and tidy and monotheistic. They don't want it suddenly to become about paleo-contact and say, actually, there's information other cultures have that we don't know anything about. They still want to be the arbiters of what's true and what's false. And so there's a tight control over what gets leaked from their libraries in terms of texts and, dare I say, technology.
Interesting.
We got to remember what the Vatican is. It's the extension and the continuation of the Roman Empire. At the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Vatican was given 0.19 square mile of land to create a building to keep a record of the old gods and church and so on. That's what they called it. And there's a Dr. Schneblin that I got to talk to for about 10 minutes, some 25 years ago. He was a red-robed cardinal at the Vatican, and he quit if he found out what they were doing. And he said, you'd be amazed to find out how much what was in the Library of Alexandria that now is at the Vatican. So they got some of that. Maybe they had something in the Roman Empire, maybe wanted to burn. I don't know. I'm just theorizing on that one. But there may be a connection there.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So, I mean, there's a control of information that the Vatican presides over, but the secular power of the Vatican is really to be wondered at. The idea that you've got a bishop in Rome who has a higher authority than your national leader is a little bit strange when you sit down and ponder it. I mean, one example, 1320, all the barons of Scotland came together, the clan leaders, and agreed that Scotland would be independent. And you might think, well, that's all that's needed. They've come together, they're going to act in solidarity, they're going to defend their border. But before they felt really able to do that, they sent a letter to the Pope saying, will you recognize our sovereignty? And if he didn't recognize it, then apparently it was a lost cause. And you think, wait a minute, isn't it a church leader they're writing to in a foreign country? What's that got to do with Scottish independence? I mean, that's how much secular international power was wielded. Or when the Cathars in the south of France had to be gotten rid of, how would you raise an army in France to destroy a whole region's population and genocide them? Well, you do it with offers from, not the King of France, from the Pope in Italy, because the Pope in Italy apparently can tell you you can have the land of any Cathar family that you kill. What is it, the business of a bishop in Rome to be parceling out land in France? And he says you can have that land as long as you pledge loyalty to me and the King of France. Well, what is that about? It's about the control of resources, control of lands, control of the world. And you try and join the dots between the teachings of Jesus and that, and you realize that the politics of the Vatican are built on something entirely different. Just to echo what you're saying, Arge, that doesn't mean that everyone in the Vatican is evil, because there are some great people there. But the institution and its purpose and its history are, again, a lesson in realpolitik that comes back to what I was saying before about the hidden hand in international politics.
Man, oh man. Oh no. The hour is almost gone.
We have 2 minutes left, Paul. So please tell everybody where to get your books. I have your printed books, but I'm going to go buy your audio book tonight because I want to hear you read it. Yes, absolutely.
Well, you can get Escaping from Eden, The Scars of Eden, and Echoes of Eden from Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. Escaping from Eden is also available as an audiobook on all major platforms, including Audible. My new book, The Eden Conspiracy, will be out on Amazon KDP later this year in May. You can keep in touch with me through my website, which is paulanthonywallis.com, Anthony with an H, Wallis, paulanthonywallis.com. Visit our new website at fifthkind.tv. Subscribe to that, and we've got exclusive content there, as well as the videos that you can see free to air on YouTube, fifthkind.tv. And you can find me on my own YouTube channel, the Paul Wallis channel.
That's wonderful. My goodness. Thank you so much, Paul. This has been an hour that went like that. Amazing.
Quite an education. This a lot of stuff that I had no clue on. That was wonderful.
Wow. Well, we'll have to do it again, guys.
Please, in the not too distant
today.
Yeah. When your new book is out, let's do another one.
Definitely, I'd love to do that.
Yeah. That is
Paul,
great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
So great.
Well, thanks so much for having me today. I always enjoy my conversations with you guys, and we always go interesting places.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Yeah,
I have so many other places I want to go, but I couldn't organize my thoughts because there's so much in there now. But everybody in the chat room was just loving it. Probably record number in our chat room. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. for being with us. And Paul, we'll have you back really soon. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Augie.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Paul.
Matt.
Bye.
And in the words of Spark, they live long and prosper.